thank you for the introduction. That takes care of the first slide, I guess, then. Todd Eby, I'm the co-founder of SuccessHACKER, and also the architect behind the Success Coaching Program, which is something that I'll talk about today. It's a training program that's focused on teaching the intricacies of customer success from a systematic approach. So a lot of what you see out there today, blogs, etc., it's big ideas, you feel like you got something from it, you go back to work, and then you try and implement it, and you figure out that, ooh, that was a nugget, but it wasn't the details. It didn't get you to a set of actionable steps that you could actually implement and use to deliver what you expected. So in essence, it's like getting a piece of IKEA furniture with no instructions and no Allen wrench. Frustrating. And it happens time in and time out. And it's something that actually was one of the major catalysts for SuccessHACKER's creation. We wanted to bring the actual how into the picture and stop sort of focusing on the why of customer success. So, I think we all get the why, right? It's about retaining your customers, expanding. Customers for life is everybody's goal. If you're in the subscription business, the doors close if the subscriptions stop. So today, what I'm going to focus on is not the why anymore. It's specifically the how. And unfortunately, that's where it gets complicated. So I look at customer success like a manufacturing process. And I think when you hear me out, you'll understand the rationale. Basically, through doing this for the last 20 plus years, the thing that I really discovered was that if it's not repeatable, if you don't know your process, if you can't break it down into a set of steps that you can document and then put in front of a brand new hire and have them execute, maybe not as eloquently as somebody that's been doing it for 3 years, but execute it well and still deliver the desired outcome, still deliver the results that you're expecting, then you don't really have something that's repeatable. You're kind of stuck with relying on the skills of your resources to carry the day. And that never scales. And what that means is that as soon as you hit that point where your acquisition funnel is just killing it, you're gonna start bleeding logos like there's no tomorrow. I don't know how many times I hear, we are incredible at getting amazing logos. Pause, 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 and we're equally as good at losing them. And so what we're gonna focus on today is some of the specific things that you need to think about when you're really looking at building a customer success program that is repeatable and designed from the ground up like a manufacturing process. So it has a core set of elements and a core set of things that you need to do and progress through, as well as a set of different levels of maturity that have constraints and realities that you're going to have to deal with as you sort of march through your evolution. So what I wanted to start out with is sort of just a quick poll in the room. Who in here is from a customer success team? Okay. And who in here is a CEO that's really interested in customer success? Okay. And for those of you that didn't raise your hand, what's driving you to want to learn more about customer success? Are you in product? Are you in development? Are you in marketing? All of those things are important. Obviously, they all go into it. It's a manufacturing process, right? So you have to hit on all cylinders. So I'm going to try and hit on things that'll be important to those of you that aren't in customer success and aren't thinking about how you can implement it well and not just fall into that trough of disillusionment that so many leaders fall into when they spend a ton of money on customer success and they don't get a quick win. I'll put it out there are two realities. Customer success is not easy, full stop. It's not cheap either. It's a long-term investment. You may see some improvements immediately, but they aren't going to be huge wins unless you're doing something horribly stupid and you can change that on a dime and all of a sudden you get an uptick in your renewals. That's just not the game. It's the long game. So be prepared for that. You know, a cautionary tale for those of you that are in customer success, we do a ton of research and we use some methods that are, you know, strictly academic and some that are semi-interesting. And one of them is going in and scraping LinkedIn to try and figure out what the average life expectancy of a customer success leader is in today's market. Anybody want to guess what that is?
7 months.
Close. It was 9 the last time we checked. Our theory was that it would be 14. You would get basically 9 months runway, time to put in place your changes and to see them blossom. Last 3 months are where the issues start to pop up and the hard conversations start to happen, and then the executive search starts. So that was our theory. We were really shocked to see how much turnover there was. And in speaking with a lot of the leaders, there were really 2 cases. A, they saw it coming, they couldn't make a change. I was just speaking with one leader that left an awesome company because he realized that no matter how good the process he built was, the customers didn't have the ability to actually utilize the product. And so it wasn't a customer success play anymore, it was a service play. They literally needed to come in and deliver the product as a prepackaged offering. We're gonna do it for you. You don't have the capacity in-house in 90% of their customer base. They found that to be true. And so for him, he built an awesome team, he built an awesome process, but he still failed because ultimately there was something outside of his control. So that's type 1. They see it coming, they recognize it, they have conversations around it, and then they give their leadership the clues about what needs to happen, and they look for an opportunity where they can be successful. Second case is they got sucked into the whirlwind. The bright, shiny object became their focus. Strategic initiatives, they couldn't stay stuck to them, they couldn't execute on them because the urgent took over the important. And so those folks, we see them time and time again. A big part of our business, ironically, is also placement. So we see a lot of the same folks coming to us, do you have any openings? And we know, and of course, they're not at the top of our list for suggested potential leadership roles. But today what I want to do is kind of break it down for you, and then ideally I want to be able to get into some Q&A on it. So I'm going to go through some of this pretty quickly. A lot of it is frameworks to help kind of get you thinking about things, and then I'm going to touch on some of the core elements. It's not a lot of time. I can't go into really low-level detail. I'd love to sit here for 8 hours and run you through this. I guarantee at the end of it you'll run out of the room, but at least you'll have learned some of the things. Some of it will stick, and I think it would be a profitable time, but we don't have that time today. So let's kind of dig into it. The chief question that everybody asks when they're either trying to reboot their effort or start out is, where do we start? There's all this talk about what we could do. How do we figure out what's important? You know, how many people is it going to take? Do I need to worry about that? What's it going to look like from a financial perspective? Am I going to get the buy-in to get the headcount that I need? I don't really know what the effort's going to take. So, you know, where are these people going to come from? Where should we focus? You know, we have 4 different products. We can't boil the ocean and be successful. How do we know which one to invest in first? And then how do I sell that to my leadership that I want to execute well in one area and then replicate that experience into others? Who's going to do what? As I look at this, I don't see how my team solely on their own is going to be successful. I'm going to have to rely on product to do a lot for me. There's this custom development that I have to do. They don't work for me. I've got folks that want me to come in and do demos for them during the sales process because we have high-level prospects that need to go deeper than either my SDR or my solution engineer can do. So they're pulled in many, many different directions. So for today, what I want to do is run you through a few different models to guide your development. These are going to be more exercises in you being able to see yourself in a scale of maturity so that you can understand better what you need to do to move on and where you're at and what those constraints look like. We're also going to talk about the different elements that go into manufacturing customer success. We're going to talk about how do these all tie together and what does the progression look like through the layer cake. And then I'm going to share with you really quickly a quick way, if you are a customer success leader, to back of the napkin this. We're going to talk about a more exhaustive process for putting together a strategy. That'll be our first stop when we get into sort of the different elements. But I'm going to give you a way to put together an action plan based on going from sad face to happy face. That's very straightforward, simple, and will give you a starting point to begin to execute on. We won't have time to go into sort of the broader aspects of that approach, but if you have a background in Agile, good for you, because that's the wave of the future when it comes to trying to wrap your hands around the basically volatile environment that is customer success. So back to the question of where to start. Everybody wants to know what they need to do, and there is no simple answer. I can't just tell you off the top of my head from a 5-minute conversation, you should start here. It just doesn't work that way. The real answer is it all depends on where you're at. What do you need to accomplish? What's critical to you? What are your constraints? What does the clay that you have to work with look like? If you're starting from ground zero, greenfield is awesome. It has its own challenges, but very rarely do we see a situation where, given sort of, I'm assuming the bulk of you, who in the room doesn't work for a subscription-based product? Sweet. The bulk of folks, you know, they basically put a product out there. They love SaaS. It's all subscription. I really enjoy teaching folks that are outside of the subscription economy how to use customer success. My most fun engagement was with a textbook company, if you can believe it. That was a super interesting business, but I digress. So how do you understand where you need to start? Basically, what I'm trying to do for you guys is break down our assessment methodology. When we get engaged by either a VC or a company to come in and look at, you know, what does the situation really look like here? You know, we come in oftentimes and do due diligence reviews to see, you know, is this really a buttoned-up operation, or, you know, are there some gaps that need to be addressed? Or we get brought in by the leadership to say, you know, we know we're not executing as well as we could. Tell us what we need to do. Give us a blueprint that we can execute on so that we can improve and we can hit these targets. So it all starts with understanding where the organization is at. And there's a number of dimensions that go into this. We'll get into the elements in more detail in just a minute, but at a high level, it all goes down to 4 boxes that you all are just absolutely familiar with: strategy, people, process, and systems. Now, when we assess maturity, we also look at things like leadership and a few other dimensions that I'm not going to go into today just for the sake of time. But we've put together a 6-stage maturity model that we pretty much can find everybody on. Now, granted, when you start breaking it down by those core elements, you start to see folks that are trending towards one level, or they're a level 2 in one area and a level 0 in another. In some cases, they may be operationally excellent, but they still fail at strategic thinking. So there's these nuances to it, so don't feel like, okay, you're just gonna get bucketed into level 3 and that's where you're at. There are obviously some factors that will show you that you're better in some areas, worse in others. But let's run through what this looks like really quickly. So recently, we added level 0. And we did that because we were seeing so many companies that were coming in and they were embracing the concept. They went to SaaStr and they fell in love with all the keynotes around how awesome customer success was. I got to get this customer success thing. What do I do? And, they're all in for the idea. They've basically seen the reality of what it can do. They've got a grasp on what it's going to do from a budgetary standpoint, the types of resources that they're going to need to acquire, and that it's going to require them to make a shift in the way that they do business. They're embracing it. They just don't know what to do next. So they really have no level of maturity whatsoever, but at least they've taken the first step. Now, level 1 is all too common. That's the hero culture. You probably have 1 to 5 CSMs. It's a player coach that's the leader. They probably were the first hire. They know where all the bodies are buried. They're effective at what they do, and that's why they got promoted. They may not be good leadership material, but if you need somebody to basically put the fire out, to run towards it when things are on fire, they're going to be that type of leader. It's going to be that kind of an organization. How many of you have ever been to a kid's soccer game? What does it look like? Everybody runs to the ball, including the goalies. That's what the organization looks like. When there is a bright, shiny object, oh my God, we're going to sell to IBM. Everybody's on it. It's all hands on deck. Everything else gets dropped. Things fall through the cracks. If there's a big problem, we pushed out a bad release. Everybody's on testing it, fixing it, calling every customer, and things tend to then slide. So it's not repeatable. There is a lot of tribal knowledge, so you don't have your processes well documented. And if you do document them, people won't use them because they believe they know the best way to do things, which is their way, maybe not the best way, but it works for them. Heroic cultures are just a fact of life. You can't avoid it. It's part of growing up. Getting out of it as quickly as possible is critical. You need to basically sit down every one of the people that has that incredible tribal knowledge in their head and suck it out and get it down on paper. You need to build things like playbooks. You need to build a wiki. You need to be thinking about, we are resource challenged at 3 CSMs. If the heavens open up and we get budget and we can hire 2 more, how are we going to train them? Because the reality is in a hero culture, everybody that you add reduces your effectiveness and efficiency by 20, 30, 40%. So that's typically the thing that's going to prompt you to try and move out of that level of maturity. Repeatable is the next stage, and that's where you have some of the things that I just described down on paper. You're using them. You're becoming able to deliver a more consistent experience, but there still are holdouts. There still are undocumented processes. There are folks that are just doing it their own way. It's not where you want to be. It's a transitory stage, ideally. You want to move out of that as fast as possible. While you will get the job done, you'll start to see that you're scaling up at this point. And so the issues that you have will just manifest at scale. So the inability to be consistent and repeatable will become a huge problem as you start to see the gaps turn into customers that are leaving. When you move into the interaction excellence phase, that's really, it's more tactical. So on a transactional basis, when you're clear about what your expected outcome is from a given segment of the overall engagement, they're on it, they deliver it. But there's no appreciation for, if we make this concession now, what is going to happen 3 steps down the road, how is that going to impact us? You're not looking at the big picture. And you'll see that in your hiring, in the way that you manage your KPIs. It's really a typical stage for most companies that are or have been in operation. They have a customer success team that's probably south of 10, and they still have a blend of probably the other 2 phases before somewhere present in their operations. When you move up to the portfolio excellence level, that's where your CSMs are thinking strategically. They're managing their entire book of business, not just the customer that's on fire. They're able to think ahead. It's more like a game of chess, right? It's very choreographed as well. They know who to go to, how to utilize them to the best extent possible in a given situation. You begin to really see the organization shine. The metrics are looking good. You're able to start thinking about innovating on what you've done. You're in a position to where you really have to have systems in place and you can actually get benefit from them because you have baked your process to the point where it's not changing every 6 weeks. It's stable. You have a hiring plan. You know how you're going to basically add to the team based on a unit of growth that corresponds to the incoming sales deals, and you understand your capacity, so you're never going to get in that position where everybody's overwhelmed, you can't get budget. You've basically laid things out to your leadership in a fashion that they can understand what the next 12 months looks like. They bought into your strategy. You can lay it out on a single sheet of paper and say, this is what we're doing, here's the constraints, this is what's not going to happen, and this is what you should expect. So on the whole, you really are fairly buttoned up. Most organizations top out at level 4 because it's hard to maintain in the long haul, and it's hard to really get into being a operationally excellent and innovative customer success team. That's not to say that it's impossible. There are a lot of them out there, but it involves having a really structured approach. You have to have things nailed down. You have to be looking at it like a growth hacker looks at, in essence, growth marketing. You're A/B testing, and pardon my language, you're A/B testing the shit out of everything that you do. You're basically looking constantly at how can you improve an operation. It becomes like the dream of that was the Toyota assembly line back in the 80s, where quality was through the roof. You knew what you were going to get. You could basically put in X, Y, Z, and you knew you were going to get 1, 2, 3 out. Operationally excellent organizations, the models that we use to sort of define it were nuclear power plants, nuclear subs, complex systems that had to work or really bad things happened. So, you're looking at refineries, you're looking at these situations where there's an understanding that customer success isn't just about onboarding the customer, doing your QBRs, and then getting them to sign the renewal. It's about the 2,000 tiny little things that happen in between that and controlling as much of those as possible. So it's about this concept of positive control and really knowing where you need to go and being able to see how things are flowing. So what I want you to do is kind of take a step back and think, where do you feel like your organization fits in that? And don't think about it just from the customer success perspective, because this is applicable to the broader organization. So we look at both the customer success team and the broader company. When we come in to do an assessment, we're going to do a series of interviews with everybody and their brother. Everybody from product development to marketing to sales to the SDRs, the CEO, on down to the QA folks that are running the regression tests. We want to look at the entire organization because it's the little things that get you. And if you're not doing something as simple as effective unit tests, that means you're going to get more bugs, which means you're going to have more angry customers, your releases are going to be shite, and that's going to impact your ability to renew and retain customers. So it's the little things, and we always look for that. And that's one of the things that, as you start to sort of ponder, where do I go, what do I need to focus on, first, big picture stuff. Later, you start to look for the small things that really, really trip you up. So now you're thinking, great, we're an X-level organization. What does that really mean? What do we need to do to improve? So it all comes down to 4 elements that you have to control. These are your levers. Again, strategy, people, process, and eventually tools. We work with every one of the management platforms out there for customer success. Our approach to systems are, there's a time and a place, but if you're going to go and deploy one early on, you're just asking to be frustrated and to go into repeated implementation cycles as you change your processes. So these are your core building blocks. They feed into then everything that you do as you march through the next framework. This is the Customer Success Accelerator framework. It's a cutesy way of explaining the different things that you have to focus on from the ground up in order to achieve the highest levels of maturity. So right out of the gate, and I know it's a fuzzy topic and a lot of leaders don't spend as much time as they should with it, but I'm a former Zenefits baby, so I can tell you culture, if you just let it grow organically, you are in for a really interesting ride 9 times out of 10. So right out of the gate, invest in understanding what the mission is, what your culture is, get very clear on your purpose. This is something that a lot of folks skip right over. They go mission, vision, values. Sweet, we're done. We've got this beautiful punchy deck that defines what our next 5 years look like. It's got a great slogan that marketing approved. That's not what I'm looking for here. What I want to do, and when we do this, we do it with the team. So we focus on the team reading back to us and explaining to us what they believe their mission is in the broader context. So if you look at somebody like HubSpot, we want to bring inbound to the world. Okay, that's a great mission. That's a great vision. How does the customer success team execute on that and be additive to it? And so what we want them to do is we want their mission to be supportive, but be constrained to what they're going to do. They are not going to be able to do everything that the company's going to do. There's a piece of it that they're responsible for. Ideally, the company will have strategy maps if they've gone through the whole balanced scorecard exercise, and they can basically cascade things down and say, oh, okay, so here's how we define the accomplishment of that mission, and here's the piece that customer success is responsible for. That's an operationally excellent organization. You don't get that very often. Most people look at you like, balanced scorecard, Kaplan, what? And so we don't expect it, we don't see it very often. So what we end up doing a lot of is getting clarity on their mission, their purpose, and there's a distinction there. So if you have a purpose to give the customer the best experience possible, if that's your purpose, but you have 200 customers per CSM, they're incongruent. You cannot deliver on that purpose. And so the point of this exercise is to bring alignment, but also to highlight when there's an expectation mismatch and there are constraints that are not going to allow you to be successful. This is why these are the critical things that we do right at the beginning. From that, once you understand if everything's in alignment, you can build your strategy. And we advocate more of a lean approach to it. I'll get into that in just a minute. But we truly believe that it should be 20% strategy and 80% execution. And that's where the whole agile piece comes in. Once you have the strategy well understood, then you can start looking at, okay, how do we build the assembly line? So that's the next level of the pyramid. That's the process that you're going to use, the training that's going to enable that, and the methodology that's going to govern the whole piece. I know methodology is like a heavy word, but ultimately, all it really is defining the expectations that you have of the team, who's doing what and when, but also, and it's interesting that a lot of people don't do this, it should describe what is expected of the customer. So one of the key failings that we're seeing in customer success now is that there's not this shared responsibility. There's not enough of it. And so all of a sudden, things that are outside of your control that you rely on for the customer, you haven't defined what's expected of them, so you get what you get. Moving up from that is operational discipline. Really succinctly and briefly, it's about adherence to the process. It's about looking at building a quality assurance mechanism that you can use as a probe to see how your results actually are against your vision. Oftentimes we see in conversations with senior leadership at companies, oh, we did a journey mapping exercise, we've really nailed things out, we've got this really robust process, and then we say, okay, great, what we want to do is we want to secret shop your customer success process. I'm going to come in, I'm going to buy your product, and I'm going to go all the way through the sales cycle into implementation and get far enough down the road that I've got a feel for what it looks like. And then I'm going to read it back to you. And we're going to see if what you believe is happening is actually happening. Oftentimes, it's very eye-opening. That's the type of thing that you need to be considering when you're looking at operational discipline and building the ability to look at it. Simple early steps could be pulling phone calls, sitting in on onboarding sessions. We've done that where we've put CEOs with resources and they were shocked. And they began to understand why they were seeing the things at the macro level that they were, because the individual interactions were tripping up their customers. And as we all know, it only takes being pissed off once to start down that road. And so you really, it's what have you done for me lately? You're only as good as your last interaction. And then at the very top of the pyramid is where we start looking at the systems and continuous improvement. This is where you're doing that A/B testing, you're doing experiments, you're really looking at how do we take this thing the next and final 10%? How do we get the last bit out of it? And so this is the framework that we use with customers, and it's what we'll be basically kind of going through the different pieces of it today. So it's this layered approach to really building that assembly line. And that's how you have to think about it. You're building a manufacturing process. It's a complex system. So first step, obviously, lay the groundwork. You've got to look at strategy. I use a lot of engine analogies and blueprints, and so you'll hear me refer to things. Just stick with the analogy. It sometimes works, sometimes it doesn't. But strategy, again, just enough so you can get executing. Too many companies get wrapped around the axle when it comes to building this beautiful strategy. It doesn't help you. If you are in an early stage company, your strategy changes far too frequently. It's not something that you're going to stick with for 2 years. You're lucky if you stick with it for 2 months. Your CEO may get a wild hair. You may roll out a brand new product. There are any number of things that can happen, and all of a sudden, all that time you spent to build the 150 slide PowerPoint deck, gone. So get just enough down to get buy-in, be able to convey it to the team, get them to understand it, get your senior leadership to understand it. Once everybody's on a single page, execute, execute, execute. So when it comes to that, we basically approached it from how do we reduce the concepts behind a full-blown strategy into a single sheet of paper. How many of you are familiar with the Lean Business Canvas? So this is an adaptation of that. and it's just targeted at the different dimensions of customer success. There's 11 boxes up there. You don't always use all of them, but what we found is if we can sit down and have a conversation where we can get the key information into the canvas, then you can begin to actually have intelligent conversations that don't have a lot of, well, it's sort of like this, but it's a little bit different. It gives you something to point to and helps you to get buy-in from all the different folks involved in it. So the core of it, though, the first place that you have to start is really nailing down your value prop. And it's a little bit different from the traditional use of Osterwalder's work. So we look at it more from a blend of the typical sort of CVP, but from a jobs to be done perspective. So when you're looking at it from the customer success standpoint, you have to remember that people don't buy products, they buy results. They have jobs that they want to do, and you have to deliver on those to be ultimately successful. So a quick example of that is a good friend of mine bought Domo simply because he had plasma screens that he wanted to put a pretty pie chart up on that was back-ended by Excel. Straightforward case, was a drop in the bucket for his budget. Domo didn't understand what his definition of success was, so they ran him through the gauntlet of all the different things the system could do, and eventually got so annoyed, he just looked for an alternate solution. So define what the job is, define what success is, deliver it to the customer, and then see if they want to proceed into different areas. Once you have defined that job universe, the interesting thing is you begin to see clusters of other jobs that they're most likely to be interested in, and all of a sudden your upsell conversations get a whole lot more intelligent. Rather than just throwing out things that they might be interested in, you have some data behind it and you can see that, oh, well, the other folks that have this same set of needs typically are looking at these things. So it's a bit of work, but it really pays off. For a place to start, this is a great example of how you define what success is for your customers. I highly recommend that you run through the exercise, you segment it out because success is going to be different for different customer segments, and you understand what it looks like. It's useful for looking at ideal customer profiles. It's useful for looking at how do we optimize our engagement model and our delivery for that set of specific needs. And it also gives you this ability to seem like you really know the customer because you understood what was going to make them successful, and they embrace that, and it makes them feel like you're not just a vendor, you're a trusted advisor. They're going to come to you when they might not go to a vendor. So it has a lot of different dividends. It's well worth doing. If you're interested in more on that, happy to talk offline. The next dimension that we want to talk about is people. So they are really the fuel for customer success. If you don't have your people well-trained and aligned, if they don't believe in what the mission is, the best strategy in the world will fail because they will look at it cross-eyed and they will do what they want to do. So when you're starting with that initial layer in the framework, the CSA framework, the really important thing is don't put a strategy in front of the team. Work with them to develop it. Get the buy-in. Get them to really embrace it. Get them to define what the values are. Values, don't have them become the 4 things that go onto the little plastic card that goes behind your ID badge that you never look at and that you eventually throw away because you get annoyed because it keeps getting stuck in your pocket. Values or behaviors are your opportunity to define what you expect the team to do, what they should be focused on. If you are data-centric and customer mad, that should be defined as a set of behaviors that make it very clear. This is how you begin to create some way of assessing how your team is behaving and if they're achieving the benchmarks that you believe are required for them to be a contributing member of the customer success team. So again, alignment, as I mentioned before, is super critical. If you do not have these things, you will not enjoy success 9 times out of 10. So we talked a lot about alignment, but one of the things that's not addressed very frequently is the different competencies and skills that a CSM has to have. Those of you that have done the job know that it's not just simply, ooh, I've got mad customer skills. There's a lot more that goes into it. We just completed a ton of research on it, and we published a competency model that has, believe it or not, 18 different skills that a CSM has to excel at in order to be a truly rock star CSM. And it's everything from business acumen to emotional intelligence, expectation management, how they work as a team. There are so many dimensions, and most success teams don't acknowledge that. And because of it, you can root cause diagnose many of their biggest challenges back down to how well trained and educated was my team? Did I hire the right people? If you have expectations that your team does not have the capability to deliver on, you will just end up frustrated. So again, another maturity model that comes to the fore. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this one. It echoes the one that I ran you through in a little bit more detail, but it really is about defining in a way that's a little bit easier to start out with rather than doing a full-blown skills assessment. Where do I believe my CSM team is at? Are they tactical? Are they strategic? Are they simply just functional? Are they able to just follow a set of instructions that I give them and they're good at that? So this is a way to start assessing the team and saying, okay, here's my top 10%. So you kind of go Jack Welch on them, right? Like, here's my top 10%, here's my middle, and they're the ones that I need to replace. We have a 6s and 9s methodology that is basically, in short, figure out who your 9s are, figure out if you can make them into 10s, keep them engaged, keep them growing, figure out everybody that's a 6 and above, but not a 9, and try and get them plugged into a 9 as a mentor and identify who you can turn into a 9, who you're going to invest your time in. Everybody that's below a 6, you got a fundamental decision. You need to determine whether or not they are contributing in a manner that makes you want to keep them. It's brutal, but one of the things that I've taken away from my experience as a customer success leader is when you have 300 employees, this is the math. And you have to do it. You have to basically make those sorts of decisions because your resources will break you if you do not have the best that you can afford. I didn't fire fast enough in certain cases, and I regret it to this day. Capacity is another unsung issue, and it's probably one of the biggest things that is overlooked. Most teams do not know enough about what a CSM has to do to make a customer successful to adequately gauge the capacity per customer that's required. And that's where you start seeing things that are rules of thumb like $1 million ARR per CSM. Like maybe, but the reality is, it depends on how many interactions, what they have to do day in and day out. In order to understand that, you have to be pretty rigorous about what goes into their day. It's one of the biggest questions that most mid-level leaders have. What do my CSMs do every day, and why are they overwhelmed? What can they actually really handle? So capacity is another big element in the people puzzle that you have to understand. You have to move into that process phase, which we'll talk about next, in order to break it down. So process is really the engine of your customer success team. It's going to be what you are going to utilize to drive success. And it's really all about workflow. If you look at manufacturing, they have an amazing workflow. They know how long it's going to stay at any given station, what needs to happen. They quality check it. It moves on. It's very repeatable. That doesn't happen by accident. It happens by design. And so it's incumbent on you to actually sit down and really break out all of the actions that are necessary to make your customers successful for a given set of jobs. So the reason why I just said given set of jobs is, again, to go back to my early statement, customer success isn't easy. This takes time. It takes effort to really sit down and look at everything that has to happen. But the reason why you do it is repeatability, but also the ability to look at that capacity and know, really, is what we're attempting to achieve realistic? Because you could put together the best process in the world, but it could take far too long, and you could never afford to have a customer success team deliver it. You would need 500 CSMs to deliver it at the level you want. But without understanding that, you can't then pare it back to what's the minimum viable process that still gets me in the neighborhood, gives me the return on the resources that I expect, and enables you to manage your human capital in a manner that is financially responsible. So what does a good workflow do for you really quick? And these are the hallmarks. It basically identifies and organizes all the activities that are required, not just the high-level ones. I see way too many playbooks that are all high-level. They leave way too much thought into the process. The idea of a playbook of a process is take the thought out of it. They should know by looking at it what the next best action is. They should know what the next 3 actions that they need to take are and line themselves up so that they can deliver on those. They also should know what the customer has to do. Most playbooks today fail because they don't include the customer dimension. There's a lot of talk about onboarding your customers in product. That's the start of having a customer playbook. You should, if you really want to nail this, build both sides of it out and be transparent with your customer. Here's what it takes. Here's what I'm going to do for you. Here's what I need you to do. Here's what's going to happen if either of us don't deliver on that contract. That's the game changer. Why do most companies struggle to understand how effective their investment in a given process is? Because they don't build it to be measured. You have to build it from the outset to be instrumented so that you can actually look at the key measures of success. I'm talking about this from a marketer standpoint as well. So if you look at it, again, from that growth marketer example, it's about the micro conversions. Each time that you are successful at delivering a given step, that's a micro conversion. That's one more step of the 2,000 that you have to take to get that customer to where they're in their happy place. Instrument those. Figure out what the most important ones are. You shouldn't have 50 million metrics. You should know the critical ones, and they should be leading indicators towards your overall success. If you focus only on the lagging indicators, you're basically just looking at stuff that's already happened and you can't do a damn thing about it.
Can you give a couple of examples of indicators besides utilization, satisfaction, NPS that will tell you the level of engagement after each phase?
Well, let's look at maybe onboarding. Off the top of my head would be an easy one to give you. So velocity. So if you identify the ideal time that a customer should be in onboarding based on your understood time frame for getting them to first value, you can be looking at the velocity at which they've completed things, and that will be a strong indicator. So if you're a marketing automation platform, for instance, your first value that you want to deliver your customer is that first campaign, right? So if they're slow to get Google Tag Manager deployed, and if they're slow to write good copy, and if they're slow to put a landing page together, then you know you're going to be in trouble. That's a strong leading indicator that there's some things on the horizon that you're not going to be able to deal with. We talked about this. A good workflow highlights the time necessary to complete the work. Wow, that's bad spacing. And yeah. Not my fonts, sorry. And that is critical because then you can start using it in that scenario that I just was speaking to. You can see when things are outside of expectations, and you begin to look at your resources and trying to figure out why Todd's taking 10 days to do something that John does it in 2 days. Why is that? How can we improve Todd's performance? Now, kind of running through all these, there's yet another framework. Sorry, what is that? YAF. IDEA, really quick. IDEA is just something that guides you through the playbook, the process generation procedure, and enforces continuous improvement. So process is never a one and done. It's always in need of improvements and refinements. So IDEA is really about establishing the expected behaviors from you as you build the processes. So one, the I, identify. What are you trying to do? What's the end goal? You need to be very, very clear on all the things that you need to accomplish. And so for that, we created something, and I will make all these available as a Google share, and I'll give it to the guys at True Venture so you can grab these. There are open source tools. Use them, improve them. If you find something that you absolutely think is a game changer, all we ask is share it with us because we're always looking to improve these. The lifecycle grid is about perspective. It's about mapping out 12 months of your engagement with the customer at each step of the way, identifying what has to happen, what are the goals, what are the common challenges, what are the dependencies, what does that customer have to do? So all those things that I just described, this is about getting that on one sheet of paper at a high level so you can look at it and say, does this make sense? Is it really going to get us there? So we ran through the components pretty quick. The basic ones to get things rolling are these 7. Timing. How long does it take to get through this phase? Is it a week? Is it 2 weeks? Is it a month? Your life cycle phases. You may use Layer, you may have your own. We've got some in there. It doesn't really matter what you use as long as it defines something that at the end there's a gate. So you know that they don't proceed to the next phase without accomplishing something, that there is some measure of success. Ownership is critical. This defines who owns it. If you're in a situation where you have an onboarding team that transitions to a CSM, you want to know that because handoffs are the glass that we drag our customers through. If they're not done well, they will break you. The customer will be very upset. They will run back to the person that helped them the most and basically break your entire beautiful machine. Key goals, if you don't have goals, why are you bothering to do it? The jobs that lead up to those goals, both the company's jobs and the customer's jobs. And then if you're aware of them, if you know the points of friction, the common challenges. This, once you complete it, gives you basically a bird's eye view of what you're going to need to build, and it'll guide the playbooks. Now, design is all about building playbooks. This is a impossible to read, simple example of it. We've put together a playbook builder that makes the process easy. Playbooks should not be something that are mystical. They're not something that is hard to wrap your head around. It's the equivalent of a really detailed project plan, full stop. But it has both sides of the equation, and it gives you something that you can later on automate and basically turn into step-by-step instructions, a la the IKEA example I gave earlier. Deliver is about exercising what you've built. You have to run it through and look at it really closely to make sure that it actually is working. The last 2 phases are evaluate, so that's again coming back and looking at, did this really work? Did it give us what we expected? And then adjust. So again, that's your continuous improvement cycle. The last area is tools. And I know I bagged on tools quite a bit. There's a time and a place for them. If you're an early stage company and you went and bought a Tatango, a Gainsight, a Strike Deck, you probably are not getting value. And as a customer success management platform provider, the worst thing that they can have is churn, right? Because they're supposed to be helping you to avoid it. So when it comes to tools, we recommend looking at them once you've gotten through a couple of iterations of your process, it's baked in, and look at them from the perspective of what can I use to put my toe in the water? Don't go and buy a full-blown platform. You don't need it yet. You're going to learn so many things along the way by doing a point solution here and a point solution there, as long as you acknowledge the fact that there's an expiration date. Like beyond a certain point, Zapier just becomes like crazy. I've built some solutions around Zaps that absolutely was like a Rube Goldberg machine. There's a point where you just stop, and then you acknowledge the fact that, okay, we have to figure out if we're going to build this in Salesforce, if we're going to go and buy Gainsight, we're going to buy somebody else. What is it going to take? But a time and a place for everything. Be sure that when you select them, you're ready for them, and that you've done your due diligence, your data is ready, you've got your processes in a format that can be easily moved into it, and that you have adequate resources to focus on it, because it will be a huge distraction. They can be both a blessing and a curse. They drive adherence, they give you insights, but there's other ways to do that with Excel and elbow grease until you're ready. So with the last couple of minutes that I have to run you through an idea that I had, this is just a crazy idea that I figured might be something useful if you're struggling to try and define your strategy, and it's certainly quicker than explaining the strategy map to you. So who in here is not familiar with what a SWOT analysis is? Sweet. Okay. Super straightforward. The place to start when you're looking at trying to figure out where you need to go next is basically a SWOT analysis. Go and look at your organization. Start by looking at the customer success organization, your organization first. Identify what you're good at, what you're not. Run through the exercise of completing a fairly rigorous SWOT analysis and see what it tells you. This is going to highlight for you potentially the areas that you want to explore. When you have that, you probably are going to have at least a handful. I've never seen somebody come through an evaluation, particularly when they're rough on themselves, where they had less than 6 or 8. Your challenge is to get it down to 4. So from sad kid that dropped their ice cream, which is where you're currently at, to nailing it. And so you have to only pick 4. That's all you have the capacity to wrap your head around right now. Put them down here, tag them for which dimension they land in. Is it people? Is it process? Is it tools? Is it strategy? And then break them down. So take this, you can use it as a slide, or you can just do it on a piece of legal paper and throw them into the areas. I would challenge you to try and get 1 in each of the dimensions. If you're going to avoid one of the dimensions, you ought to have a damn good reason, like, I don't have a tool, so I don't really have any tool challenges. If you're not putting anything in the people dimension, you're kidding yourself. So this gives you an idea of how you're going to use those levers, and then simple. Create a slide or a piece of paper for each one of them. Break it down into the next 5 actions that you have to take to get you to where you want to be. This now represents your backlog. So if you've got an agile background, you can start looking at, okay, what do I have the capacity to execute against from this list? And it becomes something that you can use to measure how in control of your change that you are. And so this is just a simple way, if you think about what I've laid out here, to sort of go back and look at your organization, figure out maybe you jumped a layer, maybe you didn't really validate the strategy and align it. Maybe you're looking at having, really buttoned up operations, but you don't have full coverage on your playbooks. Oh, we've got the onboarding phase really well defined, but then it just kind of tails off to nothing. So these are the kind of things that you'll put down on this and that you'll start looking at as opportunities for improvement. And from there, you'll build your blueprint. Now, at a bigger picture, the best way to do this and what we typically do, this is our methodology. This is what we do. We put it down on a Trello board and we literally build out the next year's worth of changes that have to happen, and we start marching through them. Course correcting as things change, but that is one of the disciplines of a truly operationalized customer success organization, is know where you need to go and be able to really look at how effective am I at getting there, or am I getting distracted? What's going on? This is the way that you break through the 9-month barrier. This is how your CEO basically keeps you on because they trust you. They feel like you're in control. You've acknowledged all the challenges and you're aware of them, and you're able to have conversations around constraints that might not enable you to achieve certain things. It's not a conversation of, well, my gut's telling me that's not going to work. You can point to, we're trying this, here's the experiment, it didn't work. It's a different type of conversation. It's a different type of customer success organization. It's what customer success should be. It isn't right now. But I challenge you all to try and think about it in this manner. And I truly believe, because I've seen it happen time and time again, if you look at it like you can manufacture it, you actually can. Thank you, guys. It was a pleasure to talk with you. I know that was a lot. I struggle to keep it to a level where it enables us to have time to ask questions. I know that I'm getting the Gong Show shepherd's crook, so dating myself. I'm going to be around for the next hour. I'm happy to sit down with anybody that wants to talk. If you're looking for something that's going to give you the ability to connect with your other peers, we do have a customer success community online. It's free, and it has about 4,000 leaders and CSMs from around the world that are really engaged and willing to tell you all about the mistakes that they made and how to avoid them. It's something that we put out there. We make no money off of it, but it's part of our goal to get folks talking about the challenges that they have and enable those that haven't experienced them yet to neatly sidestep them. So free, available for you. Again, thank you. If you're interested in looking at any sort of training, or you want to see the types of skills that we are talking about when I mentioned the competency model, successcoaching.co. The competency model is on there. We're really pushing a bunch of pieces about how you can look at the skills for your CSMs. So more to come there if that's something that you're focused on. And like I said, I'll get a share together for the slides and everything else and make it available. I know I won't get your emails, so don't worry about hearing from me. But thank you again for the time, and hopefully the rest of your conference is good.